Francis Kamau, Robert Kipore, if you can hear me, just can say hi. Just confirm that you're able to unmute your button and chat with us. Yes, I can see your message, Francis. Can you talk? Can you talk so that I can confirm you can hear me from the other end? Or whether I can hear you from my end? Just let me know whether you can unmute your button to speak. Then, yeah. Polycarp, can you try to unmute Derek or Francis or Robert Kipkorir? I just want to ensure that I can hear them. Francis, can you hear me? I can see you unmuted.
Yes, I can hear you well.
Oh, good. Thank you. I think that's important. Kamau, Francis?
Yes.
Oh yeah, you can hear me, good. Robert, can you hear me? Karibu sana, Mr. Dennis Sang. Dennis, can you hear me?
Hi guys.
Hi, Derek. How are you?
Good.
Yes.
You wanted me to say hi?
Yes, I wanted to say hi to the team even before we start.
Okay. My name is Derek. I'm happy to join.
And maybe you can also tell us what you do and the name of your company.
Yeah, I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya.
Okay.
I work at the firm of MJD Associates Advocates.
I didn't hear that very clearly.
MJD Associates Advocates.
MJD.
Yes, I'm an associate advocate.
Okay.
And I'm eager to listen in.
What's your expectation of today's session?
Well, we're in the era of data protection.
Yes.
And it's this Data Protection Act.
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe if I expect to get better insights on how to protect clients' data.
Yes.
And I hope it'll become better after this.
Yes, I noticed, or rather, I am aware the Data Protection Act was Act of 2019, right?
Yes.
And I believe it's there to ensure that the citizens' information, either personal or search related matters, are secure. Could that be the rationale behind it?
Yes, sorry?
I was just saying I'm aware that the Data Protection Act, I'm not so much conversant with it entirely, but I believe it's one thing that is currently forced to ensure that citizens' private information is secure.
Yes, I mean the whole idea is that you shouldn't process and share people's data without at least informing them that you're sharing the same, that you're processing the same.
Yes.
and giving them the purpose, then get their consent.
Good.
So that is the shortened version of what it is.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. Yes. Thank you very much. I'm willing to listen in and
Thank you.
hear what we have to say.
Thank you. And I think just at that, because I have my panelists ready, I'm glad to welcome all of you. I can see Derek is here, Francis Kamau, Robert Kipkorir, Dennis Chirchir, Dennis Sang. I can see Mr. Isaac Kimani and Liz Mutimo is also here. Welcome everybody. I believe we can can start the session because we want to maximize the 1 hour we have and ensure that we do not take much of your time. I believe that every one of us has other things that you want to attend to. And so the 1 hour we have, we want to ensure that we're able to utilize it effectively and efficiently. Yes. And so having welcomed everyone, I'm so happy that the discussion we want to have to do on information security and mitigation. We have labeled it to digital theft in Kenya. I believe this will be an enlightening session for all of us. And we hope that we can engage participatively, there's a word like that, participatory, and everybody on deck and ensuring that your contribution is taken pretty much okay. And so onto some housekeeping matters. We encourage you to mute your microphone unless you have been given an opportunity to make a contribution. If you want to raise a question or a concern, kindly use the raise your hand button at the bottom of your screen. We will see and ensure that you have a chance to be able to. We request also that all questions be shared through the Q&A, that is question and answer, using the button below your screen, and one of our panelists shall respond to you appropriately. We shall also have our Q&A session at the end of the webinar to just enable live questions and answer for not more than 15 minutes. Once given a chance to talk, please unmute your microphone and you can proceed with your question. Certainly, the questions will be given to one of the panelists to ensure that we answer and respond to you appropriately. We will also have a poll at the end of the webinar, and hoping that every one of us will be able to participate in that poll to ensure that all the views based on our time is captured again. The topic, like I've said in the discussion, we have labeled it to be digital information theft in Kenya. I think the rationale borrowed from the latest statistics that was conducted by Banking Fraud Investigations Department, that is BFID. I'm sure many of us are conversant with the body, and it shows that nearly 70% of financial crimes in East Africa are conducted through techno service schemes, which generally happens online. In its monthly crime report, DFID again cited identity theft, electronic funds transfer, sometimes bad checks, credit card fraud, loan fraud, forgery of documents, and online fraud as among the ways used to fraud financial institutions. But I also believe this is not just for financial institutions. This cuts across almost every other functionality of our economy, that is every other industry. And so we certainly must be very vigilant to ensure that we are protected and our online information shields us from either losing part of our financial assets and other aspects of the information that would be generally used for private purposes. We have a very good panelist that is ready to share with us this and take us through this discussion. And I just want to introduce them shortly. And we have two panelists who will be responding to our concerns, that is CPA Polycarp Chege and Chris Sang. Polycarp Chege has over 3 years experience in IT, risk exposure in the accounting sector, internal control, and risk analysis. He's a graduate of University of Nairobi with a bachelor's in economics and statistics, and currently undertaking applied data science using Python from the University of Michigan. In addition, he holds a certification in Google IT support. Chege has participated in multiple engagements in risk analysis, setup of internal controls and systems review. And out of his experience, I believe we'll be able to have a rich discussion in this topic. Chris Sang, on the other hand, has over 15 years experience in the ICT sector, having worked in infrastructure, mobile, and software development fields in various capacities. He's a graduate of Kenyatta University and an MBA holder in strategy and procurement from Key University, UK. Mr. Sang has led several projects in the African digital space with an emphasis on enterprise resource planning, enterprise networks, and strategy. And I believe, again, that Sang is well equipped to be able to give us content inside the aspect of risk and IT documentation. Now, KK East Africa, in a nutshell, is an independent member firm this is DFK International, which is a body of accountants that covers over 90 countries. And we're here to ensure that our clients are well equipped, both in numbers, but also in ensuring that the online content is secure at that. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome our panelists to this conversation, and hoping that we will all participate to ensure that every of your concerns is covered. So Polycarp or Sang, let me give this chance to one of us to just kick it up and give it to Sang. Chris, take it up. Good. Chris, you ready?
Thank you, Fred.
Good. Thank you very much.
I think I'll allow Polycarp to just do some introduction, and then I'll pick it up from there.
All right.
So morning. So I'll proceed to share my screen. Okay, as introduced by Fred, we are going to tackle social engineering. Part of it will handle introduction. Then we'll go through some of the statistics on social engineering attacks. Then we'll conduct a poll. Then we'll major into three main ways of that social engineer attackers use. That's reconnaissance and OSINT, identity theft, phishing, stages of a socially engineered attack. Then we'll conduct a second poll. Then we'll take you through monetizing on compromised systems and some of the human and computer weaknesses that facilitate socially engineered attacks. Then after that, we'll go to mitigation. Now, after handling that, we'll take your questions, but you can be typing in your questions as we continue. So at this juncture, let me, Okay. So just a simple introduction on what a social engineering attack is. So in the context of information security, the first aspect is psychological manipulation, which leads people to diverge confidential information. So we will handle this as we go along. You will see the first stage of psychologically manipulating people, then the second stage, which is diverging confidential information. And there is a last stage, which is monetizing that information. So which brings financial loss to an organization or to an individual. So you'd find that nowadays, in spite of most organizations having security measures such as firewalls, antivirus, and there are so many other measures that are there, you'll find that the human being at the center of all this is the weakest link, because they can be manipulated to diverge information, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And so in as much as you might have security measures, it's good first to be able to know that all your staff are aware about socially engineered attacks, and they can be able to respond as expected against such manipulation. So a perfect example of socially engineered attack is actually, I don't know how many of you have watched a movie. It's called Troy. So in this movie, you find that the Greeks were fighting with Troy. And at some point, when they realized that they would lose the war, they psychologically engineered a trick. And the Trojans, they came, they took a horse. So first they built a big horse as a prize, and they moved their fleet away from the shores. And the Trojans fell for that ploy, and they took the horse and they took it inside their city towards their temple. Now at night, the Greek soldiers came out of this horse because they were actually hidden in that horse. And they were able to take over the city, and that's how Troy fell. So in this aspect, you find that the first stage was psychological manipulation. So the Greeks were able to trick the Trojans that actually it was a prize without actually knowing that they were bringing in the enemy in their own city. And the second aspect was lowering their guard. So you find the Trojans lowered their guard. They entered into a celebratory mood. Nobody bothered to search whether this horse was authentically a prize. And at the end of the day, you find then the Greeks were able to take over the Trojan city. So in that respect, you'll find that that story will be, you'll be able to find key aspects of that story in a socially engineered attack. So at this juncture, I'd like to welcome the other fellow panelists. Chris.
Thank you, Polycarp. Thanks for the movie trivia. I believe it is based on Greek mythology. So I guess we know the Greeks for some wisdom. I think we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so there are some statistics available on social engineering attacks. Basically, 98% of cyber attacks rely on social engineering because you need to have a basis for launching an attack. You need to be able to do an assessment in terms of what are the weaknesses that the target organization has. I'll apologize, my internet connection is a bit iffy, but I hope you can hear me. You need to be able to assess. I mean, like any good criminal, they need to do a cost-benefit analysis, whether it's actually worth attacking an organization in terms of whether there will be a payoff at the end. However, it is the gateway to the cyber attack because you need a launching pad. New employees are most susceptible to socially engineered or to social engineering because, of course, they are a bit naive in terms of organization information. They don't have the composure because they are still eager to please. I think all of us remember when we were still either interns or still on probation at our early jobs, and we remember how we were keen to make sure that we were viewed in a good light. And these are some of the things that attackers take advantage of. Recent hires are definitely a big risk. So within your organization, you need to focus attention on recent hires in terms of preparing them for such kind of attacks. Of course, 21% of current or former employees use social engineering to gain financial advantage. Typical situations are when somebody is separated from an organization in a way that is not it is not peaceful or is not amicable. Then there is usually a desire to get back at the organization. In some cases, there is an element of curiosity. Sometimes it's just for the psychological thrill of having done something to somebody who you may feel either has mistreated you or you feel that they have not dealt with you fairly. So on the next slide. So there is some data again on the analysis of the type of breaches. Again, this is indicative of what the motivation is. So you find identity theft is a large one, and account access is also significant. Identity theft and account and the rest have a connection because identity theft is a way of accessing the information that will facilitate account access, facilitate financial access, even nuisance to a level. And of course, existential data is basically just acquiring data that may be useful, but it is not clear how useful it will be until maybe a future date. I want to point out at this point that a lot of data breaches happen just because there is a growing market in data or a growing black market in data. So you'll find that people will try as much as possible to acquire data that they think they can monetize. But I think we'll be dealing with that in a later conversation in this webinar. Of course, the sources of breaches, typically the majority are from malicious outsiders. However, you still have cases of accidental loss. Somebody clicking send on an email which possibly has an attachment with a lot of customer or data that is actually private. You also have an element of malicious insiders. I think, as we mentioned before, if there's an element of a feeling of unfair treatment, then you would find an insider who would seek to get back at the organization. Hacktivists are a growing group of bad actors who basically have a social agenda. So, for instance, you may find that they may have a campaign to do with certain social issues. Of course, the big one we've been talking about this year, of course, is climate change. So you may find that some hackers may seek to damage the infrastructure of organizations which they see to be responsible for climate change. I think Pandora Papers is another good example where legal firms, and I believe we have an advocate here, legal firms have a lot of sensitive data, and they may have clients who are public personalities, and so you find that those data breaches are designed to either embarrass or bring to the fore certain social issues such as the gap between the rich and the poor and so on. Then there's a 1% that are not too clear about why about who they are. And typically you may find within that 1%, you could find that there are people who are just doing it because they are able to, or they are practicing their skills as they try and improve and get better and better at it. So on the next slide. I think we'll do a poll now. Maybe I'll hand over to Polycarp so that he can walk us through how to do it.
So Fred, you can activate the poll.
Maybe I can make some comments on the poll in terms of maybe clarifying. So basically, we are seeking to find out if which of the 4 items you feel that are the most likely threats to your organization. Of course, ransomware is where data is held and a ransom is required before it is released. Phishing, which we will go into detail later on, is basically an attack where the attacker basically wants information or access to be provided by an insider, either knowingly or unknowingly. And then, of course, human error, which is very fairly clear. And then social media compromise, where you may find that somebody poses as an organization and then deals with its clients in a bid to acquire information from them. I think the poll is up, so we can go to the next slide.
Fred, you can terminate the poll. We will show the results later. Okay. Well, I think since Fred has shared the results, we can, Chris, we can just have a discussion around it.
Sure. Yeah, clearly it seems that phishing and human error appear to be what people consider to be the biggest threats. I guess this is also because there is a big detection rate in a sense, because if you make a mistake, it is very likely that you will be aware of it. And with phishing, of course, the consequences become readily visible thereafter. I'm interested. It is interesting that people have said that ransomware ranks very low. I think with a lot of our clients, we have found that ransomware seems to be on the increase. However, possibly, especially with the increase of the usage of cryptocurrencies, but I guess maybe in this region, because cryptocurrency is yet to take root, possibly we are not experiencing it so much in our jurisdictions. I think we can go ahead. Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, before anybody launches an attack on an organization, they really need to understand what the weaknesses are. They need to do an assessment. They need to gather some intelligence that will inform them in terms of how easy it will be to access the information that they are looking for. And because this information will provide the building blocks for the attack and how they will be able to compromise the systems that are there. within the organization, protecting these information assets. So reconnaissance and OSINT is a big component of social engineering. OSINT basically stands for open source intelligence. And why it is called open source is because it targets information that is publicly available. I know it might be tempting to think that now anything open source is not good, but there is, of course, a distinction between open source software and proprietary software, where open source is basically where many people contribute to the code base of a solution, which in many senses and in many cases makes it actually more robust than in a proprietary setting, because nobody has a monopoly on information, and the more people you can involve, it is likely the better that the more information you'll be able to gather. However, of course, again, that strength becomes an issue when it comes to social engineering, because basically what is happening is the public information that is available is being leveraged and provides what I call hooks. So I'll give you an example, for instance. If I am a Facebook user and I indicate on my Facebook that I am out of the country on a holiday or something, possibly I've even indicated where I am, then it therefore means it is likely that my home is unoccupied at that particular time. So it is information which somebody can now use and approach maybe your security person or your person in the house and say, oh, so-and-so called me from abroad and he said he needs 1, 2, 3 from his house, and therefore I'm here to collect it. And because you have that information, then you are able to convince the victim that you are privy to the goings on, and therefore you're able to access that information or those assets that are typically protected. The tools that, as I mentioned before, the tools include social media. Crowdsourcing is a big one in the sense of where you can provide a challenge or provide a request for information to the what we'd call either the metaverse, or in Kenya, I think Kenyans on Twitter. We see it all the time when, for instance, people are looking for missing persons. You post a picture of them on Twitter and you say, if anyone has seen this person, please contact the number below. There are examples of how this has happened, especially in cases where, for instance, in demonstrations or of such intelligence gathering, where somebody posts a picture and says, does anybody know where this picture was taken? And of course, people apply their skills, their knowledge, or even their experience to the issue and then provide the information. Typically in such situations, you might have even reverse image searches. So for instance, if I've taken a picture or somebody has access to my profile picture, they'll be able to look at the background and determine where I was when I took that picture. And that provides some information in terms of my general location or where I'm usually based. The other source is public databases. And that's why you find things like Huduma number is a very interesting case study, because basically what the Huduma number has done is it has created a situation where you are able to marry identification documentation such as an ID card, a passport, an NHIF number, an NSSF number with a physical location or a physical residence. So it has provided that hook where now I can begin to develop a profile or a picture of who an individual is simply by attaching the information that I have gotten from the public database. So on the next slide is a framework courtesy of OSINT, and you can see that basically it's, as I was mentioning earlier, we are moving from the known to the unknown. So in terms of you find that I'll be able to access an email address because maybe it is available on a website. Once I've gotten that email address, I'm able to access the domain name because, of course, within the email, there's the email address, the domain name is indicated. Or there are tools on the internet which can show me what the IP address of that domain name is. And with the IP address, of course, it provides me with a location, a physical location, because all ISPs, internet service providers, provide have a record of the physical location of the IP addresses that their customers use. Then, of course, there are images, videos, documents that I mentioned that are accessible on the internet. Some of the things that are interesting is if you do a search of yourself, either a Google search or whichever search engine you use, just have a look at the images that appear on the internet of you. And then you may find that there is a lot more information that than you thought. I remember a personal case where I was attending a function in a certain town, and one of my friends was taking pictures, and they took a picture of me and uploaded it immediately to Facebook. Then Facebook, with its facial recognition algorithm, basically alerted all my connections that I was in this particular town. And the next thing I know is somebody is calling me and telling me, hey, we're in the same town, we need to hook up, without any initiation on my part. So that is the strength of open source intelligence gathering. As I mentioned, again, you can see the social networks are a big source of such information. And I guess when you come to the issues of mitigation, we need to begin to understand what kind of presence we have on the internet in terms of the media that we use. It is a long list, but I'm sure we shall be making it available later on. But as the steps go on and on, you begin to filter and get more and more detail about what an individual looks like. So on the next slide, we have identity theft, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the next step really from open source intelligence gathering. Because if, for instance, I'm able to ascertain your email address, I'm able to ascertain your domain, and I'm able to ascertain your IP address and therefore your location, then I am in a position to begin to impersonate you. Basically, the aim is to acquire a benefit that person is entitled to, or provide a gateway to committing fraud. As I mentioned earlier, it typically happens through the theft of identifiers such as mobile numbers, email addresses, government numbers. So for instance, if you think back to the last time you spoke to your bank on the phone, some of the details that they asked you may have included your ID number, may have included your date of birth, may have included if in some cases they may even ask you the account number that you have, and also maybe the last transaction that you executed with the bank. A similar case with M-Pesa and so on. So if an attacker has all this information, then they are able to pretend that they are you, and then it opens a gateway for them to begin to access your assets, access your and to be able to transact on your behalf without your knowledge or without your permission. I see this very often, especially with the older generation, where they are coming to terms with new technologies, and you find they may give their phone to their children or younger relatives and tell them, please call Safaricom and sort out, maybe make a reversal of a transaction on my behalf. And you find that it is very simple, because that person who's making the call has access to all the information that is required to transact. They have the date of birth, they have the ID number, and possibly they have the last transaction that was executed. So it is much simpler than we actually think it is. We always think that it is harder than it actually is, but we do it almost all the time. I even recall situations where, even when we're dealing with basic things like access to buildings, and we find a watchman, a security officer, and they're asking us questions, and we begin to provide information that sort of tries to convince them that we are not who we exactly are, but we are somebody else, and that allows us in. So identity theft is more rampant than we actually realize. And many people may never discover that it has happened, because we are not in the habit of checking our statements, of making sure our transactions are the ones that all transactions that have happened on our accounts were initiated by us. Very often we say, oh, it's a funny transaction, but I'll check with the bank later on. So most people actually never discover the theft has happened. In fact, statistics show that close to 80% may never discover that the theft has happened, or the theft of the identity has happened, and 16% will find out more than 3 months later. So it may already have happened to you. Some of the things that you need to check. Safaricom have an interesting campaign currently where they provide a USSD number where you can check how many lines are registered in your name. And if you see a number there that you do not recognize, then you can complain, and they can have a look at it for you. And the next issue is basically the risks that come with identity theft. There's authentication. So especially from a corporate perspective, authentication risk is a big issue, because if somebody has access to your email address, has access to your username, your password, then they are able to access corporate networks and information assets. Very often we are fans of convenience. So things like single sign-ons are where one sign-on allows you to access all corporate networks and information assets, usually poses a big risk. There is executive risk, where identifying as the victim confers authority, and that authority can therefore be used to execute or transact. I remember a personal case where I had an issue with one of my bank passwords, and I needed it to be reset. And when I called to the bank, the first thing he asked me was, "Are you the administrator?" And I simply said yes. And once I said yes, then he proceeded to assist me with everything that I wanted, even if I was not the administrator. So that executive risk creates a big loophole. Reputational risk is also one that we need to be aware of, because if and I think we are beginning to see more and more, especially on the global stage, the proliferation of things like deepfakes, where I can pretend, I can actually take somebody's face and make them appear to be saying something that they did not say. So we've been seeing this especially with politicians, but also with a few leading business people, where they are seen to be saying things that are unacceptable or are socially taboo, and therefore it tarnishes their image and their standing. One point I would like to make quite strongly here is one of the biggest risk areas are business owners, because you find that as a business owner, once they are able to steal your identity, then they have pretty much access to the entire organization. Because you find that because a business owner is either the founder or is central to a lot of activities within the organization, then either they have super user access, or they have administrative access, or they are custodians of sensitive information such as bank account details, such as usernames, and quite a bit of information to do with the organization, that whereas typically it was necessary for them to have, as the business grows, then it may be less and less important for them to have. So that is one area that needs to be provided a lot of attention. So as we mentioned earlier, new recruits, new employees, but also one of the blind spots is business owners. And going on to the next slide. The next next type of social engineering attack is phishing. As you can see from the graphic there, it is very similar to the actual phishing with an F at the beginning, in terms of somebody is trying to hook some information so that they can reel it in and be able to benefit from it. It is a high volume tactic because very often you find that many people are approached at the same time, hoping that one or two of them will fall prey, and then the next phase of the attack can begin. And it basically works through encouraging a victim to provide access through data forms or links. So in the first type, you'll find is an unsolicited email that has a link on it and some text that encourages you to click on the link, either purporting to be an attachment with some important information, or a link that takes you to a site that requests your information. And you'll find typically they try to impersonate organizations that are well known. They try to impersonate an organization that are well known. So we need to be careful about the domain names that we receive. So for instance, if something looks like it's from Safaricom but is not quite Safaricom, you need to be careful, because they are looking for those kind of names that appear familiar. The spear phishing is basically where you receive an email or receive a message purporting to be from a senior executive in the organization, requiring you to do something. Whale is where a senior official in the organization is targeted because, of course, of their access rights. And Angler is, as I mentioned earlier, where we have social media, and you find somebody pretending to be an organization that you transact with on social media, and then requesting you to provide them with information. Yep, I think going to the next one. The stages, I think I'll let Polycarp walk us through this one.
So the stages of a socially engineered attack are three. So the first one is the initial stage, where it's more of a psychologically designed manipulation to lower your guard and to divulge some information. Then the second stage will be system compromise. So at this stage, you may not be aware of it, but for some of the attacks like denial of service, you can be able to tell that the attack has happened. But now after the system compromise, the attacker is able to monetize the exploit. So we look at how to monetize at a later stage. So at this juncture, we can move on to the next slide. So Fred, you can help us put on the next poll. Okay, so for this poll, we just want to gauge your level of understanding on mitigation against such kind of attacks, so as to be able also to at least to tailor make the next sessions that we'll have for information security. So you can just fill in, then we'll share the results in a few. So you find, well, the several stages before the attack happens. There is also the stage where the attacker discovers a vulnerability. So a vulnerability is a system weakness that has not been exploited by the attacker. So at that stage, it exists, but it doesn't pose a danger at that stage. It's just a threat to your organization. Then the next one is after an attacker has exploited a vulnerability. So at this stage, it's where perhaps you have lowered your guard and divulged some confidential information. And out of that, the attacker has leverage and a way in to get into the system, or maybe to execute a financial transaction on online platforms using your credentials. And now the final stage, it's after an attack. There are ways that you can be able to reverse it. So based on this, we want just to gauge how do you understand a socially engineered attack? Yeah, so Fred, I think you can just share the results. Yeah, so I've seen most of you concur that to stop an attack, you'd rather stop it before it occurs. There's also after an attacker has discovered a vulnerability, but before they take advantage of it. After an attacker has exploited a vulnerability, it's at 9%. And the last one, after an attack, nobody believes that you can stop it or reverse it at that stage. So this data actually agrees with the concept of system information security, where you'll rather be safe rather than sorry, or try to mitigate it later. So this calls for adequate measures and continuous systems reviews, just to make sure that any vulnerability that is in your system has been well catered for. And also to make sure that then your system will be can be able to withstand an attack. And also that would also mean training of your staff, just to make sure they are aware of such kind of socially engineered attacks. So at this juncture, I'd like to proceed to the next slide, which is monetizing an exploit. So I'll take you through this. So just to continue from where Chris has left, you find some of these attacks. So I'll just go through scenario-based attacks, just to make you aware of how it can unravel. So you find denial of service. So you find there's most attacks, by the fact that they start from a socially engineered attack, you might find the aim of the attacker is actually to bombard your system with so many requests until it's overwhelmed. So at that stage, you'll find then your email services are not working. If you are running on an online payment service, it's not working. Your financial systems, they crash down. So, and you find in that case, then the attacker would demand some payment to restore the service. So for you to be able to continue with the normal operations. So this one happens, has happened to a lot of big multinationals where a lot of operations are based online, like for airline companies, for big insurance companies. There are cases where we have seen, like in the past 2 years, attacks which take the form of a denial of service. Then the next one would be blackmail using compromising of valuable personal data. So you find we share a lot of information through our social media. And also, if you are to look at the history, the browsing history of some of the stuff, you might find some compromising of valuable personal data. For instance, maybe let's say two staff exchanged communication via email where they either gossiped director in a very bad way. And if an attacker was to get such kind of information, then you find they might blackmail such kind of a staff. It's either you give me access to this system, or I'll divert this information to the person you are talking about. So that's one of the ways you find it being done. The other one is solving a problem that the attacker initially created. So you might find that perhaps you have an adware in your system, so which consistently creates ads no matter the page you are in. And at that stage, you might find that it shows you, in case you want to stop this ad, you can just click here and contact the contact center. So without knowing, perhaps you'll be asked your credentials, your email and such, and they can be able to compromise. At least they have your personal email or your work email. So some of these platforms are able to sieve out personal emails like Gmail. They'll ask you for a work email. And through that, you have given them at least an access. The first stage has started because they have your credentials. Now from there, they will switch to more of OSINT. That's just observing the communication to this email to be able to detect if there is any vulnerability which they can take advantage of. The other type you'd find is leaving a backdoor. So this one would be done by somebody who is trusted to the organization, say maybe an IT support firm. Most of the organizations have regular system reviews and updates. So you find along this path, one of the staff might just leave a backdoor where they can take advantage of later. So this means such things as leaving an account, one of the access accounts in the system, so that they can be able to come in later, say a financial system like SAP, where you can be able to initiate transactions from the financial system to the bank. And they can be able now to divert money to one of their bank accounts. And in this case, most of them have the rights to override the approval systems in the financial system. The other one is man in the middle. So this one involves change of payment bank details, especially for platforms where you find the systems are not secure. So in this case, this one has been used a lot of late, especially for English football clubs. So this year, FBI arrested a Nigerian called Hushpapi, who was just a member of a larger group. So what they would do is they would compromise financial systems, especially finance emails. That's why it would start. Finance emails for English football clubs. And once they compromise it, they will just observe You wouldn't be aware. The user of that email wouldn't be aware, but they would observe any communication you have with clients so that they can be able to sieve out any large payments that the organization is expecting, perhaps in the next 2 to 6 months. Then what they would do, they would send out a communication to the party who is to make the payment and instruct them that the payment bank details have changed from now the legit bank details to their own bank details. So the payment would be made without the knowledge of this firm. So later, when they ask the party who was to make payment, they would be like, okay, we made the payment. And they would discover that actually the payment bank details were changed at a certain stage. So in the form of this attack, you find the starting point, it's actually the finance department emails. So in that case, then you should be, the organization should put in measures to make sure that the finance emails are secure, and to a large extent, all emails in the organization. The other way of monetizing data is just selling customer data. So this one is made possible by Hacktivist. You might come across such kind of news headlines like Google was hacked, Gmail was hacked, or Microsoft accounts were hacked. Yahoo has had so many cases of where their emails are hacked, and you find Hacktivists just hack, then they sell this data of the usernames, the emails, and the passwords in the black market, so that in case there is a user who maybe can take advantage of it, they can just buy the data and use it either to compromise a system or for other purposes. The other one is sabotage through misinformation. So this one especially involves the compromise of social media accounts. So for instance, this year, some accounts for US celebrities and also for the former US President Obama were compromised. And the attackers instructed the followers that if you send your Bitcoins to this link, we will be able to multiply it 3 times in the next 24 hours. And because this information was coming from seemingly the owners of that account, most of the people trusted it. And it's estimated that millions of money actually was lost through that Bitcoin scam. So at this juncture, I'd like to proceed. I'd like to invite Chris to take us through human and computer weaknesses that facilitate such kind of attacks.
Thank you, Polycarp. For the interest of time, I will try and combine the next 2 sections. So basically, and I think this was one of the questions that has been raised in the chat. How does somebody acquire, or how does somebody earn the trust of the victim? I think Polycarp has mentioned offering something that they want. So basically, it could be tangible. So if you click this link, you stand a chance to win something, or you are participating in a social good, and therefore you get the feel-good factor, as you mentioned, in terms of the celebrities who are saying contribute, and I will also match. The fear is another way. I think Polycarp has mentioned, where there is a threat that something bad will happen if you do not comply. And the other weakness is urgency, because it is a big issue that when we feel that there is a sense of urgency, then we tend to act without necessarily thinking through. So we small way. So fight and flight reactions kick in. There's a promise of immediate relief, and of course, analysis is deferred. So we do not look the gift horse in the mouth, as it were. Computer weaknesses that exist are Of course, the net never forgets. Anything that you upload is always there somewhere. Even if you delete it, it will always exist in some corner of the internet. Convenience, where instead of keying in our password all the time, we want to copy and paste it from somewhere. Now the problem is where it is residing and we are copying it from. It can be compromised. There are multiple dimensions of views of individuals and organizations. So you find that in an organization, you may find that there is data that is lying around that covers different information on certain individuals. I'll give you an example. So for instance, if as an organization we are keeping account details of an individual, we may also be combining it with their ID number or their date of birth. So once that information is compromised, then there is a multiple view of the individual. Computers, again, are predisposed to big data in the sense of once we crossed a certain threshold in terms of processing power, we no longer were involved in sampling, but because now we are able to process a very large amount of data at the same time, then it means we can actually gather all the information on an individual. Quick boot is something that, of course, we are always keen on, and you say, oh, my computer is slow, typically because when you start it, it starts slowly. And you find for many, there's a temptation of not switching off the computer altogether. Maybe we just put it to sleep so that when you start it up, it starts quickly. However, that compromises us because it keeps data stored that can be compromised. There's a little helper syndrome in the sense of we rely on our devices for everything. So you find, for instance, on your phone, you've saved your passwords, you've saved your PIN number for your ATM card. So it is your little helper, but then you have over-relied on it. And then ultimately, there is a faceless nature of the computer, because when a hacker compromises your machine and requests you for information, then you may find that because you think that it is coming from a reputable organization, you discount, or you're not alert to what is going on. So basically, these are the ways that human and computer weaknesses are predispose us to become victims. And ultimately, and I think this was one of the key things of how to mitigate against these things, training is a must because that is the only way that we can overcome the human weaknesses. People must be ready when the attack happens, so they know what to do, what to look out for, the warning signs, and also what to do on a regular basis. Typically, people say trust, then verify. But in this particular case, I always encourage people to verify first, then trust. So if somebody calls you and claims to be from a certain organization, you can say, let me check with your manager, or let me check with the bank itself, or check with the organization itself on a trusted communication channel before you can now commit to acting. Communication is key. We need to, in our organizations, we need to talk to our users, but also critically, we need to listen to them. So we need to create a way that if somebody feels they have been approached, they are able to say it without necessarily feeling embarrassed or feeling that they have failed. Empowering users on system security tools. So instead of the individual having to wait all the time for IT support to come and do an update, you need to be able to encourage them to do updates. So for instance, maybe send reminders, send out circulars saying, check on your antivirus update, make sure it's up to the current file. At this point, I'd like to encourage anybody who is using Chrome. There are certain vulnerabilities that have been found. So please make sure you're using the most current version. Of course, deployment of effective tools. No organization should be without a firewall and antivirus, some form of VPN, especially in the case of remote access. Everybody should be using a password manager. The use of sticky notes and and writing it down is really unacceptable. Second to last is creating unique environments. We are very tempted when you buy new equipment, we just use it in its default state. So we don't change the passwords, we don't change the settings. We need to create a situation where it makes it difficult for the hacker to be able to get into our organization because it is not a vanilla setup. And then finally, we need to always take responsibility for information assets. So we have a lot more information than we think we do. Just a way of illustrating this is, if I were to go through your SMS history, the amount of information that I'll be able to get on other people, either their phone numbers, their email addresses, even in some cases, PIN numbers. So, and even as organizations, we need to assess what details we have on our customers and take responsibility for that. I think in the conversation before the webinar began, there was something about data protection and how data processors and data holders are now responsible for the information that they have. We need to be alive to what we are holding and what risks it portrays. I think I'm done. Sorry, I think we've run a bit over, but I think I'll hand over back to Polycarp for the next day.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris and Polycarp, for that elaborate presentation. Great. I think we've covered quite a bit. I would want to get to see whether anybody has a question that they will need to be clarified before we come to the end of our discussion today. Perhaps as we wait for any person with a question, by the way, if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand, like I said earlier, and I will see it and give you a chance. But Chris, I know you've mentioned something to do with this and data protection. I'm just a bit, I'm wondering how, to the extent that you mentioned phishing and social engineering, I'm just looking at the relationship between this data protection, especially the act that was passed in 2019. Any connection, any relationship between the two? Yes.
Absolutely, because what is happening, and I think it is a valid concern, is that many organizations have amassed a large quantity of personal data. If you think about how many buildings do you go to where they ask for your ID number and they write it down in a book, and then you also write your name, you write your phone number alongside your ID number. Then the question becomes, what happens to that book? The person you're talking to may actually be employed by a security company that is contracted to guard the building. So he's even a third party removed from the organization that you're dealing with. So the question, and I think this of course became a big issue when we're talking about things like voter registration or the referendum, for instance. So all these data sources and the storages, how are they being governed? Who is watching how this data is being handled, and are the owners of the data, which is you and me, are we involved in how that data is used? So yes, the framework that has been set up is designed to address some of these concerns. Basically, they have divided the people. They've divided the space into those who process the data, those who store the data, and then of course the regulator. Sadly, I think we have gotten into a situation where revenue generation seems to be a big item. So you end up in a situation where if you're a data processor, then you have to pay an annual license fee and so on and so forth. So I am a bit concerned that we are not executing a noble cause very well. But ultimately, I think we'll get there slowly by slowly.
Other than the other aspects of mitigation that you mentioned, I recently found myself registered in a political party that I didn't even know its name. And one, I was concerned how they got my data, my details. I know certainly I must have registered in some of the security points, checkpoints that you're talking about. But I don't think I don't remember registering for any political party as of today. So when the information went out to the public that people had been registered in political parties, I checked myself in the eCitizen actually this week, and I found my name in one of the political parties. And I was wondering, when did I do that? How do people, or how should people protect themselves from such breaches of data? Now that I found myself there, would it be viable for me to take a legal action to this to ensure that my personal information is protected and even follow through how this political party found my details so that I can protect myself? Any comments to that as relates to the risks of information theft?
Yes, it is a bit of a double-edged sword, and unfortunately, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think the way we have chosen to go about it as a country, from a legislative perspective, has its downsides. First and foremost, yes, there is a complaint process. There's a complaints process about how your data was used. However, the problem is, how do you identify who exactly leaked that information, or who was the custodian of the data that got provided for this particular purpose? In some cases, and I think we have all been gone through this, is for instance, all the books that we sign for M-Pesa transactions. They have our names, they have our ID numbers, they have our telephone numbers. Now, with access to that, then basically somebody can go ahead and register you for whatever political party. I found myself that my wife registered for a party on Christmas Day. And I was wondering, when did she sneak away from me to go and register? So I think the frameworks are beginning to fill out in terms of their efficacy. So ideally, I'm thinking that, for instance, we may start saying we need to take organizations like Safaricom to task and say, how are they governing the use of our data that they demand from us for transactional purposes, but then they go ahead and do not secure. So I think maybe Omtata needs to check into this story and protect us. But in terms of mitigation on a personal level, yes, it is a bit difficult, especially when such information is demanded from us for transactional purposes. But yes, there is a complaints procedure. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chris. I don't know whether there's any other person with a burning question or concern. I'm not seeing any question here. But thank you very much, Chris and Polycarp, for engaging in the conversation. But also thank you very much, our participants. We really appreciate that you created time for this conversation. Just want to appreciate Anthony Gitunga, Oscar Ayabazibwe, Brian Ochieng, Chichi Wambua, Dennis Chichir, Derek Moma, Francis Kamau, Gilbert Sang, Odaya Chichir, Isaac Imani, Jotham Kamau, Kipyegon Emmanuel, Rachel Njeru, Robert Korir, Kandie. Yes, of course, I appreciate myself for creating it. So we hope to be able to create content every now and again on topical issues that either affect our businesses or current affairs that has a relationship, whether positive or negative, to our businesses, so that we can be more enlightened and be equipped to be able to mitigate any risks that may affect our progress and going concern. And that said, without any further ado, we just want to say thank you, everybody. Yes, any wrap up, Chris, that you want to close with?
I just want to thank you. Thank you for doing a good job. Thank you for guiding the process. I thank all the participants for taking the time as well. We are happy to help with engaging on some of the mitigation steps, either for your organization or for you personally. I'm sure there'll be contact details where you can reach us on, and you can take this conversation a step further. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll be able to share this, the PowerPoint presentation to the emails of the participants, just in case they want to refer to any information that perhaps may have bypassed them. Polycarp, anything?
Well, I think just resonates with what Chris has said, that I think instead of being vigilant after an instance has happened, you'd rather be vigilant before. So as an organization and also in collaboration with Chris, we're able to do system reviews and also to assess the vulnerabilities that you have in the system. Because as you realize, every vulnerability has a financial cost attached to it. So if it that way, it's easy then to view it as saving money at the end of the day. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful day.